My daughter asked me to sign over $68,000 for my savings to help her refinance her home. After the transfer went through, my place in her life quietly ended. The money left my account and my access to her did not return. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has reached. The bank envelope came in the mail before I felt anything about it. It was a plain statement, the kind I used to skim and file. It showed the withdrawal posted and cleared, my balance reduced to a number that looked unfinished. I remember thinking I should call and ask for a corrected copy. For a moment, I believed there had been a printing error or that I was reading the wrong line. Later that afternoon, I logged into my account online, just to be sure. The transaction was there again, dated, confirmed, no notes attached. The money was gone in a way that did not invite questions. I closed the laptop without printing anything. That evening, I tried to call my daughter to tell her the paperwork was finalized. The call rang longer than usual. When it was answered, it was her husband's voice, careful, polite. He said she was busy with the kids and would call me back. He said it the same way someone says the weather is fine. She did not call back that night. Or the next morning. A few days later, another envelope arrived, also from the bank. It explained in small print that my savings account now required a longer notice period for withdrawals. Because of the reduced balance, I read it twice, not because it was confusing, because it felt like something I should remember. At that point, I still believed everything else was unchanged. I put the letters together in a drawer, the way I always had, and I told myself I would hear from her when things settled down. Before the transfer, my days had a predictable shape. I spoke to my daughter every few days. Sometimes it was just a short call. She would be driving or folding laundry. She talked about the house, the interest rates, the pressure of keeping everything steady. I listened, because that was my role and because I always had. She came by once or twice a month with the children, not announced visits, just quick stops. Shoes stayed on. Sometimes the engine kept running. I kept snacks she liked in the cupboard, even though I did not eat them myself. It mattered to me that she knew I remembered. When she asked about the money, it did not feel sudden. She explained the numbers carefully, slower than usual, as if making room for my age. She said it would help them breathe for a while. Temporary was the word she used. I remember nodding, even though she could not see me. That night, I checked my savings, the account I had never touched, except for emergencies. The one I thought of as already decided, already spoken for, in some future I did not name, the amount was there. And I told myself that meant I could help without changing anything else. The week before the transfer, she called twice, once to confirm the amount, once to ask if I was sure. Her voice sounded relieved when I said yes. I took that as proof that I was doing the right thing. At the time, nothing else moved. My chair was still by the window, my phone still rang, my name still felt attached to the word mother. I did not know I was standing at the edge of something that would not invite me back. After that first missed call, I waited. Waiting had always worked before. I told myself she would call when the refinancing was complete. When the paperwork settled, when there was time to breathe again, days passed, not in a dramatic way, just slightly misaligned. The following week, late in the morning, I tried calling again. That used to be a quiet time for her. The phone went straight to voicemail. I did not leave a message. I told myself I would sound impatient if I did. A few days later, I tried in the evening. Her husband answered again. He said the same thing, that she was busy with the kids. That things were hectic right now. His tone did not change. It was consistent enough to feel practiced, or maybe just settled. After that, I sent a short text. Nothing that required a response, just checking in. Hope everything is going well. It showed as delivered. It stayed that way. The pattern formed without discussion. My calls rang longer. My texts remained unopened longer. When responses did come, they were brief. And they came from him, not her. He said she was overwhelmed or tired or asleep. There was always a reason, and none of them asked anything of me. The bank statements kept arriving on schedule. Each month the balance stayed the same. The absence did not fluctuate the way money does. It was steady. I noticed I had stopped mentioning my own days. There was no place to put that information anymore. I became someone who waited for updates rather than sharing them. Nothing was said directly, no boundary was announced, but the distance repeated itself often enough that it began to feel official. like a process that had already been approved somewhere I did not have access to. I argued with myself in small, quiet ways. I told myself I was being sensitive, that families shift, that children grow busy in ways parents cannot follow. I reminded myself that I had offered the money freely. That help should not come with expectations, even unspoken ones. At the same time, I kept replaying the timing, the request, the transfer, the silence that followed. I tried rearranging the order in my head, seeing if another explanation would fit better. There was not. I wondered if I had said something wrong during one of our last calls. I went back over my words, the pauses, the moments where I might have sounded hesitant or slow. I considered whether my questions about the refinance had felt like doubt instead of care. There were moments when I felt embarrassed for noticing the change at all, as if paying attention made me smaller. I told myself not to count calls, not to measure days, not to treat affection like an account balance. And still, I noticed, I thought about asking her directly if something was wrong each time I stopped. I did not want to introduce a problem that might not exist. I did not want to sound like someone keeping score, so I stayed quiet. I answered when they reached out, which was rarely. I kept my voice steady when speaking to her husband, even though it felt strange that he had become the point of contact. Inside, I was divided between wanting to protect my dignity and wanting my daughter back the way she had been. I did not yet understand that those two things were starting to pull in opposite directions. The realization did not come during a phone call or a holiday. It came while I was filling out a routine form at the bank. One of those updates they send every few years. I listed my assets carefully, slower than I used to, making sure the numbers matched what was left. When I reached the section asking for emergency contacts, I paused. My daughter's name was still there, written in my handwriting from years earlier. I hesitated, longer than the form required. It occurred to me then that if something happened to me, she would be notified before I had heard her voice again. The thought felt factual, not emotional, which is how I knew it was true. I looked back at the months behind me and saw a pattern I had been avoiding naming. The help had been received. The access had not been returned. The relationship had been rerouted without my involvement. There was no single moment to point to, no message explaining anything, just a steady narrowing of space where I used to fit. I realized I had been waiting for the refinancing to end, as if that were the reason for the distance. But the paperwork was long finished. The bank had confirmed that weeks ago. What remained was not a busy period or a temporary strain. It was a new arrangement, one where my role had been reduced to a line on a form kept out of habit rather than use. I did not feel angry then. I felt clear, and that clarity arrived without asking for my permission. After that, I stopped initiating contact, not as a statement and not as a test. I simply did not reach for the phone anymore when I thought of her. I let the thought pass and continued with whatever was in front of me. When a bank notice arrived about adjusting my account structure, I handled it myself. I did not mention it to anyone. I changed my emergency contact to a local service, one that would respond regardless of family ties. The clerk did not ask questions. I moved the remaining savings into a more restricted account, one that required only my signature. It was a procedural decision made during a short appointment. It felt appropriate to keep it that way. A few weeks later, her husband sent a brief message. He asked if everything was okay, said they had not heard from me in a while. I read it once. I did not respond immediately. When I did reply, it was polite and short. The kind of message that closes a topic instead of opening one. I did not tell my daughter that I had noticed the change. I did not explain how the silence had settled into something permanent. There was no announcement. No drawing of lines. The decision was internal. I adjusted my expectations quietly, the same way I adjusted my finances. I stopped assuming that access would return just because it had existed before. Nothing outward shifted. But from that point on, I behaved as someone who understood where she stood. The consequences showed up slowly, in ordinary places. I was no longer included in casual plans. I found out about birthdays after they passed, through photos shared by other relatives. When holidays came, I waited to see if an invitation would arrive. When it did not, I made arrangements for myself, not with resentment, just logistics. My phone became quiet in a different way. Not empty, settled. I stopped checking it for updates that were unlikely to come. When messages did arrive, they were practical, usually forwarded by her husband. They ended cleanly. Without follow-up, I noticed that decisions were being made without considering me at all, not just financial ones. Family decisions, where the children would go to school, when they would travel. These were things I used to hear about early, sometimes before they were finalized. Now they arrived as completed facts if they arrived at all. The money remained unspoken. It was never mentioned again, not as gratitude, not as obligation. It existed only in my records. In the smaller balance I now managed carefully, in their lives it appeared to have dissolved into something unnamed. I adjusted to the absence the way people adjust to reduced income. I planned more carefully, I spoke less. I stopped expecting a return on something that had already been spent. The consequence was not a dramatic break. It was a permanent narrowing, one that asked nothing from me and offered nothing back. In the aftermath, my days became quieter. More predictable, I knew where I stood, which meant I no longer waited for shifts that might correct themselves. I filled my time with routines that did not depend on being included by anyone else. I still thought of my daughter often. Not with bitterness, with a kind of distance. That surprised me. She existed in my life as a fact, not a presence. I knew where she lived. I knew the children were growing. I did not know the details anymore. The savings I had left were enough, if I was careful. I reviewed my expenses regularly, not because I was anxious, because I had learned that security now came only from what I controlled directly. That understanding stayed with me. Occasionally, someone would ask why they did not see me at family gatherings. I gave neutral answers. People tend to accept neutrality more easily than explanations. Nothing was repaired. Nothing was officially broken either. The relationship remained, but in a reduced form, like a room that had been closed off, repurposed without discussion. That is how it stayed.